Whether the goal is to obtain information, punish crimes or enemies, or cause a slow, gruesome death, man's creative imagination has come up with some incredible ways to inflict pain and suffering on people.
We seem to be fascinated with torture. We watch horror movies and shows and visit torture museums. So, let's take a closer look at 5 forms of torture. And we have to warn you, while we take great care to be gentle with information, the subject is disturbing.
Let's dig into this.
Warning: viewer discretion advised.
One of the most famous torture devices of all time is the rack. Known from its use at the Tower of London, it may have actually come from ancient Greece. Records of the arrest and torture of Herostratus, the man who burned the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, include torture on a rack.
The device has been made of a ladder or a raised platform with rollers and ropes used to pull the limbs of the person being interrogated. And it was known to be a torture device at the time, not intended to cause death, but extreme suffering.
The most famous victim of the rack may have been Anne Askew. She was an English writer and Protestant preacher arrested twice during the reign of King Henry VIII for heresy. Anne's teaching were quite popular, and her suspected followers included many women of the court, including Queen Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's last wife.
After refusing to name fellow Protestants during questioning in 1546, her wrists and ankles were fastened to the rack, and she was pulled and raised about 5 inches above the rack table by the ropes. She was questioned and refused to answer or reveal names of her followers or any other Protestant, even as the ropes were tightened. By the time it was over, her shoulders and hips were pulled from the sockets and her elbows and knees dislocated. In excruciating pain and unable to walk, she had to be carried to her execution site, where she was fastened to a stake by chains and burned.
You may have heard of the pear of anguish, also called the choke pear. Many examples can be found in museums around the world. Many claim that the pear was used extensively throughout the Spanish Inquisition. Others say it may have not been used as a torture device at all.
It's described as a medieval device that could be inserted into any orifice of the body and open to cause unbearable pain. Some examples have spikes and are assumed to have been used to cause mutilation as well. Just looking at these items can make your skin crawl.
However, experts have analyzed the history of the device and found no first-hand accounts of their use. Even amongst the extensive records of the Inquisition, one of the earliest accounts of the pear comes from the 1639 General Inventory of History of Thieves by de Calvi, which say it is a gag used by robbers to subdue people while they empty the contents of their house.
Investigations of museum exhibit pairs of anguish have shown the springs in the devices are not medieval and not even strong enough to cause a great deal of damage. And the key can only close many of the pairs, not open them, making the whole insertion process questionable at best.
Researchers have suggested they may have been used as anything from a surgical speculum to a shoe stretcher. Or they may even be examples of fake medieval torture devices made to sell to museums. But there's always the chance that whatever you imagine looking at them actually happened.
A scold was someone who constantly broke the public peace by quarreling with neighbors or authorities. The term was most often, but not always, used against women. If you were a nag, a gossip, got into fights, or were caught using slanderous or blasphemous speech, the scold's bridle could be your punishment.
Also known as the gossip's bridle, witch bridle, or brank, there are many examples in museums today. Fashioned from iron, most had an uncomfortable piece that went into the mouth to silence the wearer. Eating and drinking was impossible. Some held the mouth open or had spikes to cause severe discomfort, and some had a bell to bring attention to the wearer, who was often taken through the town on a lead as part of their punishment, with the intention that their pain and humiliation would stop their unwanted behavior.
Scold's bridles were first recorded in 1567 in Scotland, but their use expanded to England, Wales, and even the British colonies in the New World well into the 18th century.
Some forms of torture that began centuries ago were used much longer than you may think. The rat torture is said to have come from ancient Rome, where Emperor Nero used it against his enemies around 60 AD, and in medieval England in the Tower of London used as a form of torture, leaving prisoners in the dark cells with rats. But the Dutch refined the torture during the Dutch Revolt of the 17th century.
Documents from the time show a pottery bowl filled with rats would be placed open side down on the victim. The bowl was heated with hot coals, and the rats were forced to eat their way through human flesh or die. They were capable of working quite quickly, scratching and biting, and causing unbearable pain.
You may think torture like this died out a long time ago, but historians have documented rat torture use from 1964 until the early 1990s by South American dictators in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil.
Of course, when you mention impalement, most people think of Vlad Dracul, the 15th century prince of Wallachia, who became known as Vlad the Impaler after dining among his impaled enemies. But he wasn't the first or the last to use this torture. In fact, documented cases of impalement have happened as recently as the early 20th century.
Impalement by insertion of a stake, pole, spear, or hook into the human body has been used for centuries, and the form of impalement used could cause death instantly or subject the victim to days of excruciating pain before death. Forms of impalement include longitudinal, which follows the spine, transverse impalement, which is a stake or pole through the chest, abdomen, or heart, and gaunching, which involved dropping a victim from a height onto spikes. People were even impaled by hooks on walls or poles.
The earliest mention of impalement comes from the Code of Hammurabi in about 1772 BC, where a woman was impaled for killing her husband. The ancient Phoenicians and Egyptians both used impalement as common punishment, and this relief showing the torture comes from the palace of the Assyrian king at Nimrud and is dated at about 720 BC. Darius the Great of Persia boasted about impaling 3,000 people when he conquered Babylon in 522 BC.
The Ottoman Empire used different forms of torture to punish crimes like highway robbery until the late 1830s. And during the genocide of the Armenians from 1915 to 1923, the Ottomans killed as many as 1.2 million, reportedly impaling an unknown number of girls.
Here's one last thing to think about. All of these forms of torture were legal and morally acceptable in their time.
Let us know what you think in the comments.
And thanks for watching. Hey, here's another DragonDen video you might like.
And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button.
And you can hit the notification bell if you'd like to know when our videos come out.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.